Picture it, Lake Tahoe. The bright blue water surrounded by green trees with a grand white mountain standing tall in the background. It's postcard perfect. And if you are grabbing a postcard from the 1980s, you'd be sure to see a woman wearing a bikini and a smile on skis gliding down the mountain while men race each other to the bottom of the steep slopes. For some, this is the American dream. And for those that live in the prime of their life in the 80s, this was exactly the idea they were looking for. For some, this dream was a reality due to sacrifice and job placement, and for others, this dream was a reality because they forced it into their schedule. And then there were those on the mountain on March 31st, 1982, living their adventurous, ski-driven dreams. There is a hero of the story. There are those who sacrificed their lives for their job, some for adventure, and for one, this big, blue, beautiful, snow-filled dream became a nightmare. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View.
It's a good intro.
I only messed up once. Okay, welcome back. I have my friend Amanda with me, and I brought Amanda in because she asks very good questions, and I'm super excited for that. And because of that, we are both well aware that this episode is going to take longer than the others. It will take longer than the others. And you're not going to get all of it unless you are on Patreon. And we now have a Patreon account. You can find it on her website, or maybe I'll stick the link in the show notes too. Make it easy.
It's going to have a little more meat on the bones.
Yeah, or a lot. And I think because this particular episode is very information heavy, I think I might even split it up into topics. So that way it's not just like you get an overwhelming amount of information and you're able to just kind of digest it as you please. Or, in the next episode, we're going to talk about dogs quite a bit. So if that's something that interests you, but avalanches doesn't, you can just skip all of that. And you're going to know that you're skipping it because my cat is in the garage. Macy!
We've got a loose animal. Oh, look at how cute.
Okay, where was I? I have no idea.
Okay, so we're splitting it up.
We're going to split it up.
Separate episode on dogs.
And so we're only going to get through part of the story today.
Yeah, okay.
So part of the story, we will finish the story. The next episode is pretty much going to be all of the story and some information about dogs. The goal with the Patreon is to have bonus content for anyone and everyone. And that might be in the form of uncut episodes like we're going to be doing today, where if you're listening on Apple, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, any of those services, you're not going to get all of the questions and you're not going to get all of the answers. If you head on over to Patreon, I'm going to put it all there. So that's something that new that we're doing, and I'm excited for it. And are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Okay. Alpine Meadows is a ski resort located in the east side of the Sierra Nevadas in Bear Valley near Lake Tahoe. They are still in operation today. You can still go ski down these same slopes that, these people did 40 years ago.
Okay.
40 years ago. They have just over 2,000 acres of land, and they are about 5 miles north of Lake Tahoe. And this northern ridge, one side is Alpine Meadows, and the other side of that ridge is another ski resort called Squaw Valley. Squaw Valley is also still in operation. However, their name has since changed to Palisades Tahoe. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, but
that sounds right.
They have a new name. They're no longer Squaw Valley. At almost 7,000 feet above sea level, this area is ideal for skiers and boarders as they're guaranteed a mass amount of snow each year. They have a variety of slope levels ranging from tame to the country's most challenging, and it is considered a Class A avalanche zone, which is the highest avalanche zone hazard that can be given.
This specific resort, or just that area north of Tahoe?
It's the area, but Alpine Meadows is within that area.
Okay.
So Alpine Meadows opened on December 28th of 1961, and because of the Class A designation, it quickly became the forefront of avalanche research as they developed one of the most experienced and proficient avalanche forecasting and control programs in the country. And I also want to mention that this predates computerized technology. So all of this information was on paper, even in the 80s.
Okay.
It was all paper, binders. Making up the team of avalanche control was a group of men who also worked as search and rescue, ski patrol, and first responders. The team was made up of Larry Haywood, Jim Flem, who was the avalanche forecaster for Alpine Meadows, Casey Jones, Tom Kimbrough, Gary Murphy, Igor Goloveski, Jake Smith, whose name was actually Jeffrey James, and Lanny Johnson. Then there was the trail crew, which included Tom Otis, Dennis Smith, who is Jake's older brother, and then even more men made up the maintenance crew that made sure that the roads and parking lots were all clear for visitors with the amount of snow that they got.
This is Alpine Meadows staff.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So they have a specific first responder, ski patrol, avalanche control group. They have a trail group, which is separate from them, and then they have a maintenance group. And so there's a lot of people working on the grounds basically 24/7.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Above Larry was Bernie Kingery. He was the mountain manager, and then Bob Blair, who was the patrol director, and these three worked together to make sure that the daily activities at the resort ran smooth. And in comparison to their neighbors at Squaw Valley, the men on this ski patrol were rugged and rebellious. Squaw Valley required their ski patrol team to stay clean cut, and they couldn't have hair longer than their shoulders. Quick reminder, this was in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I feel like
It's on brand for the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Alpine Meadows Ski Patrol regularly had shaggy beards, their hair pulled back into ponytails, and the only real rule that they were required to follow was that they could not wear jeans.
So I'm so interested in for the people listening, I don't know the story, so I'm very intrigued as to what's going to happen. And it's very interesting that you're painting like neighboring resorts as two different cultures.
They're different cultures.
So I'm so curious how this is going to play into the story.
There was almost like a rivalry.
Yeah.
But they do end up working together.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd have.
I think when you're in that position and something devastating happens, the only real option that you have is to help.
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about humans is when there's tragedy and emergency, all of the differences go out the window.
Right.
It's like we're a tribe species, so it's like all hands on deck.
Yes.
And that's when typically you see the most beautiful part of humanity come out.
And
it's a dichotomy because it's tragedy. It's usually terrible. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, it's beautiful.
Okay, so the only real rule that they had was that they could not wear jeans, and as alternatives, because they didn't have the same snow pants or powder pants that we have today, they would wear outlandish outfits, including lime green pants and corduroy.
Okay.
So that again makes me think like 80s, the lime green pants especially.
Well, I would imagine a bright color is
Bright
typical.
colors are good.
Yeah.
Especially when you're out in nature where there's a lot of very, I don't want to say muted colors, but they're very
They're the neutral, natural.
neutral. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, neutral is a good word for it.
Okay, so so far we've got Squaw Valley. What is that, the west side of the mountains? Well, that doesn't matter. Squaw Valley, we've got clean cut, specific rules, no shaggy hair. And then we've got Alpine Meadows, who's a bit lax.
Yes.
Not a lot of rules other than no denim.
If
A little bit eccentric.
So the work that they do essentially encompassed the jobs of firefighters, police officers, paramedics, explosive experts, mountain guides, and you roll that all into a ski bum, if you can picture that.
Yeah.
These men were comprised of the nearly suicidal personalities that maintained jobs as ski patrol in the winter and often climbing rangers in the summer. They were all under 40 except for one, and most were single, which allowed them to live the lives that they do and do the work that they did. Many had gone to college and even had PhDs. However, once in the workforce, they found that sitting behind a desk was the worst way to live and found work for significantly less pay elsewhere. These men could not wait to get to work in the morning. This was a rowdy group of men. They worked very, very hard and had the reputation for partying just as hard as they worked. They showed up ready to save lives in the variety of ways their position on the ski patrol required, whether that was through direct care or through indirect care, meaning avalanche control. Despite their rebellious and sometimes immature behavior, the men making up the ski patrol team were extremely successful and often assisted injured people off the mountain, marked out hazardous zones with bamboo poles and rope, and on occasion coordinated efforts with local search and rescue teams to assist in rescue or recovery of those who had no chance of getting out of the mountains on their own. The National Ski Patrol System was birthed in the United States in 1938 after Charles Minot Dole died during a race in 1936 in Massachusetts after he collided with a tree. Oof. Yeah. My brother, when we were very young, ran full speed into a tree. And we were goofing around and we were playing, and he last second turned and went straight into it. And I do remember the thud of him hitting that tree. So I cannot imagine how hard you would have to hit a tree for it to kill you.
Yeah, well, and I don't think it takes much to accumulate some momentum on skis.
No.
And then you're hitting an object that there's no movement.
There's no movement.
I mean, it's not good.
It happens. It's
unfortunate. Wait, so ski patrol started 2 years later. What does that mean?
Ski patrol started in the 1930s.
38, right? 2 years after this incident.
Yeah.
What does ski patrol mean?
They help to extract people from nature. So, and we don't really talk too much about that particular aspect of it, but the people, if you go to have you gone snowboarding or skiing or anything?
Yep.
Have you ever seen anybody injured and get put on a gurney and slid off of a mountain?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
But I didn't, I wasn't doing Black Diamond Mountain, so.
Yeah, I did. The very first time I ever went snowboarding, I was in Colorado, and some friends were going to Breckenridge, which I had no idea was a more advanced area. I'm not good. I liked it. I enjoyed it, but I fell every 10, 20 feet.
Are you a skier or a snowboarder?
I would rather snowboard.
Same.
Skiing, the separate.
Dude, I can't, there's 4 things.
Yes.
I'd rather have one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
The idea, my thing is and here's the injured anxiety coming out. My thing is that if those skis cross, I don't feel confident that I could uncross them quickly enough to not fall on my face and hurt myself.
Yeah.
So I again, echo what you said. I would rather have one thing to focus on.
Yeah. I feel like I tried skiing and it feels like you need much more like body awareness and coordination than I probably innately have. And it was just like, oh, this is a nightmare.
This is bad.
There's too many things. I can't.
So yeah, so the ski patrol help to
Okay.
remove injured and sometimes dead people from mountains.
Oh.
Their favorite part of the job was what happened behind the scenes before and after hours for resorts and during storms of varying intensity. These men risked life and limb to ensure the safety of those who came to enjoy the snow and sights. Avalanche control meant that they got to throw bombs onto slopes and shoot artillery from a distance to induce smaller avalanche slides in order to prevent larger disastrous slides. Many, if not all, of the men had been caught in a slide at some point in their career, some having been through multiple.
So they're setting off bombs, essentially, to move. Dude, these guys, I
Nuts.
think they were all men.
Yes.
Not that women can't do it, but that's, that makes sense for the 80s.
Yes.
These guys are adrenaline junkies.
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
they live for this.
Yes.
Yeah.
They do. They do. That is.
Wow. What a job.
I know.
There is, like, I have found myself yearning for a bit of, like, a slight emergency in some jobs. Mm-hmm. Like a little bit of excitement and turmoil.
Something to get your heart.
Yeah, a little challenge.
Yeah.
That's a whole different. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The purpose of avalanche control is not to prevent avalanches from happening, but rather induce them in smaller size, larger quantities. And part of this process will also test the snow for stability. So while it is avalanche control, it is also a simple test to determine safety. Generally speaking, if explosives don't create an avalanche, then it is determined that the snow is safe and stable at that time.
I would imagine there's lots of metrics, obviously snowfall, rainfall, but I mean, potentially humidity, barometric pressure, like they're probably monitoring all of that.
So there's different types of snow.
Yeah.
And the different types of snow contain different percentage of air.
Yeah.
And that goes into it. And the type of snow that it was, like the actual shape of the crystals.
Oh, wow.
Plays an effect. And we do talk about it a little bit.
I mean, it makes sense. Anyone who's made a snowman knows, like, oh, this snow sucks.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it just doesn't work well.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there's the snowballs that you can throw and they don't kill you to get hit with them.
yeah.
And then there's the snowballs that give you black eyes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into, I'm sure, determining when they're going to be like, yep, get the bombs out.
Yeah.
And they're probably all like, yeah,
they're like,
get the
yes.
bombs out.
Bombs away, baby.
By design, explosives are either shot or thrown into designated areas, which on impact creates a ripple effect, jostling the ground and snow and thus triggering mini and sometimes large slides. This then allows the runoff to flow into closed section of the mountains and prevents the slopes from becoming too heavy with snow. Alpine Meadows in 1982 had 15 control routes that included 300 potential avalanche paths. And roughly 50 days out of the season, Ski Patrol was performing avalanche control, which included as much as 300 bombs, which breaks down into about 600 pounds of dynamite.
Whoa. Oh, man.
Let that sit for a second.
I'm just thinking about, like, sometimes humans are so confusing. Like, someone was like, I have an idea. Let me put on wood, like, slats on my feet and slide down a snowy mountain.
With bombs.
And it's like, and we have developed a whole system, a whole marketing, structure for crazy.
Yes. The bombs were individual hand charges that weighed 2 pounds each and were filled with gelatin dynamite. So this charge was then duct taped to the bombs, and this was what created the avalanche bombs that the patrolmen would use. With the length of a fuse and a slower burn time at elevation, I'm just thinking about how crazy you're going to be like. And a slower burn time at the elevation they were at, ski patrol had roughly 70 seconds between igniting the fuse and the explosion of the bomb. Once the igniter was pulled, the fuse was lit and the timer started to count down. But there wasn't actually a timer. In order to make sure that it was lit during storms, the patrolman responsible for tossing the bombs would hold it close to his face to make sure that it got ignited and they're not just throwing a dud.
Okay, so they ignite it. They're holding it close to their face to make sure it's
going.
And then they have 70 seconds?
That ignite, 70 seconds starts. So if they're off by
I mean, are they just counting? Like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi?
I think they just learn. I think it's like one of those things where it's like...
Well, to learn means it implies failure. So who missed? who miscounted?
Well, I mean, it's probably like... I'm sure somebody has miscounted. But I'm sure it's probably like one of those things where it's like... And so they've probably learned like... This has been sitting here for a little bit. Better get rid of it. I'm sure that they've just... by nature learned what that 70 seconds is. Other ways to make sure that the fuse was lit was to listen for a hissing sound, be able to visually see the fuse bubbling, which means you're looking at it, or holding it down in the snow to see if the fuse turned the snow an ashy charcoal color. All of those alternatives were pretty much a moot point in the middle of a storm, especially like the one that struck Lake Tahoe in March 1982. When the men went out to perform avalanche control with the bombs, they would go in partners and sometimes alone, and this was because in the event that something disastrous occurred, like the backpack full of bombs spontaneously combusting,
oh my God,
it would explode only with that 1 or 2 people there. And so those were the only 1 or 2 people that were in danger.
I can't believe I didn't even think about the transport because it's 2023. So you're like, oh, somehow they just 4-wheel up there and... Mm-hmm. But are they, I mean, they're just got a JanSport packed with dynamite, with bombs, and they're like just trekking up there themselves. Oh my God.
Once a bomb is thrown, one of 2 things will happen. Either the snow gives way to an avalanche or the snow doesn't move at all. Another method that was used was shooting artillery into the mountains with either a recoilless rifle or a howitzer cannon. In the 1950s,
Sorry. I kind of stuttered on cannon, so.
Yeah, these guys are insane. So in the 1950s, a location had been determined that would be perfect for shooting rounds into the slope, and a platform was built to support the recoilless rifle that would be stationed there. This spot was later dubbed Gunner's Knob, and in the 1950s, it was clear that the area that encompassed alpine meadows would be a high avalanche area. However, it is unclear if anyone at that time knew how often the rifle platform would need to be used for avalanche control. It was here at Gunner's Knob that the rifle was used mostly on the slopes of Beaver Bowl and Poma Rocks, which you can still look up maps and they'll identify those slopes for you because Alpine Meadows is still in operation. But this rifle had a really cool feature that allowed them to preset coordinates of locations, so even in the worst of weather, they felt confident that they were hitting the right place. This rifle use has since been retired at Alpine Meadows since the rifle was on loan from the U.S. government and was largely unused, meaning that they stopped making the ammunition needed for it. And because of the location, it was extremely hazardous to access the rifle during the storms, and adding another layer of complications. When they decided that they needed to use this rifle, they had to call an Army Ranger to come out and pull the trigger. So none of the men on the patrol team had permission to fire this rifle. The other location a rifle was kept and shot from was the parking lot, using a vintage 1948 howitzer cannon. The cannon was also borrowed from the military, and with the location from the parking lot, it controlled the slopes closer to the lodge, cabins, Summit Terminal building, maintenance shed, and access roads. The howitzer was stored in their maintenance shed before also being retired, and the ammunition were 2 pounds of TNT encased in a 4-foot bullet.
Okay, so this is, rifle is misleading. This is a cannon.
This one is a cannon.
Okay.
The other one
okay.
is
All right.
rifle.
Okay.
Without any specifics.
Oh my God. Oh boy.
And a quick side note, I'm going to say maintenance shed quite a bit. I'm also going to interchange it with maintenance garage, but this was not a shed. It was a barn. It had multiple stories.
Oh, yeah.
It stored all of their equipment, and it also served as a shop for equipment repairs when something broke down. So when I say shed, I don't mean, the shed that you put your lawnmower in.
Yeah, or it's like a small warehouse, probably.
Yes.
Do they have ski lifts at this time?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Shooting artillery in the mountains was not originally meant for avalanche control, but it quickly became realized the usefulness of it being able to control the mountain. In World War I, avalanches were used as a weapon. Think Mulan. Have you seen Mulan?
I mean, I have.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
Do you remember the scene where, and I only know this because Sam and I watched Mulan not terribly long ago. There's a scene where they're in this valley and the Huns are charging at them, and Mulan grabs one of their dragon cannon things and goes charging at them and aims it at a mountain and lights it, and she causes an avalanche, which wipes out the majority of the Huns. And then there is one other way that the ski patrol would regularly test the snow and set off avalanches, and this was by skiing across the slope one at a time and purposefully trying to set off the snow. So they would go, so if you have your slope, instead of going down it, you go horizontal across it, and with their lower ski, they're pushing the snow down. And it really only gets the top layers of snow, but with the exception of this particular storm, that's usually all that you need to set something off with, and if nothing moves with that, it's determined safe.
Okay. Now, do avalanches always work in that it's necessarily top down?
No.
Or okay.
Alpine Meadows by Forest took avalanche potential and control seriously. Not only were they in a high-risk area, but they also had some of the best knowledge on their team. In 1982, they had 4 plans that would be enacted depending on the weather, the level of hazard, the severity of a storm, what tools the patrolmen had used, and what sort of results they were seeing from those actions. The plans then determined how and which ski lifts, paths, roads, parking lots, and other trails would be open, as well as determining what employees needed to show up. The terrifying reality of what avalanches are. Avalanche snow is not the same snow that you imagine falling from the sky in its light and fluffy flakes. It is not snow that you can scoop with your hands and toss into the air or catch a single flake on your tongue. It is heavy and dense, and what is left after surviving the down mountain turmoil sets like concrete.
Oh.
And the majority of the time, people are so disoriented, if they're conscious at all.
Yeah.
They're so disoriented that by the time they realize that they needed to move, they can't.
Whew. So what makes it set like concrete? Do we know?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll explain.
Okay.
Throughout a season, different storms add different and defined layers of snow on top of each other. Each snow is different and each layer is distinct in its thickness, the amount of air that is in the layer of snow, and the strength of the shape of the flakes and how they lock together. And these are the most dangerous because there's so much air within the snow. It's light and it's fluffy and there's no stability in that snowpack.
Yeah, there's flexibility
Yes.
in that
There's
soft layer.
A lot of movement.
A lot of movement, yeah.
Yep. Beyond
Again, back to like humidity, air pressure, and then it's going to change that fluff layer, and then
boom.
Here we go.
Beyond this, snow layers are constantly getting worked over just from the climate. Temperature gains and drops, wind, rain, snow, and movement on or even under the snow all play a role in how each layer changes and how the snow reacts and possibly binds to the layers above and below it, as well as the very first layer binds to the ground. And these are the aspects that avalanche forecasters look at to monitor and predict avalanche behavior. Yet, the more complex, more likely, and most dangerous reason is when a layer of snow multiple storms deep becomes too unstable and severs its bind with the layer beneath it. In this circumstance, multiple layers of snow cut loose at once and come charging down the mountainside. This is called a slab avalanche, and they are characterized by sharp fault lines that are created when the sheet first begins to break away from the mountainside. Once it starts, the fault line expands horizontally, characterized by a loud crack, and will often hover for seconds before the rumble of the ground giving way begins. Another cause is just too much volume in too short of a time. Generally, 1 inch per hour is enough to put forecasters on high alert, and this is because that fast accumulation doesn't allow for the layer to settle or form a bond or relationship with the layer below. Because snow exists within a degree of its melting point, an avalanche breaks away from the mountainside and makes its way to its runout. The friction created by snow, trees, rocks, and debris creates heat just high enough that the snow melts enough to move like water, but maintain its solid ice-like structure. Unlike water, you cannot swim your way through it. It is thick and dense as it is deadly. Getting caught in an avalanche is not unlike being outside in a hurricane. When moving at top speeds, the avalanche can create wind equaling that of a Category 5 hurricane, and anything in its direct path will be destroyed. The air and wind created can even cause damage to forest, building, cars, and people nearby. Moving at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour or 322 kilometers per hour, they're impossible to outrun. Due to the way avalanches move, the area directly in front of them is almost like a vacuum. So
Yeah.
once that wind moves past, you get sucked in.
Yeah.
So if you're still there, once the wind is gone, you're sucked into the avalanche. You don't get pushed with the wind or with that quote unquote solid unit. Once the snow slows to a halt in the runoff zone, the heat immediately cools, and with that, the slightly melted snowflakes instantly fuse together. The snow is so dense that it will freeze a person in the delicate state that they came to a stop in. You can't breathe, you can't move, and you can't even blink.
I mean, what are the statistics on surviving the impact of an avalanche? Like if it's 200 miles an hour, how does your body even survive
So
the impact or the tumble?
that's actually a good question. I was looking at like just regular statistics of surviving an avalanche. I never thought until like you started your sentence and I was like, oh, I should have done something. I never even thought to look at the statistics of people who die from suffocation versus die from trauma.
Yeah.
Once buried, even in the shallowest of graves, victims cannot self-rescue. The solid snow often needs to be chipped away at in a slow and careful process with steel shovels. Those who have been swept into the clutches of avalanches have had gloves, hats, boots, and jackets stripped from their bodies.
Holy cow.
Encased in a wall of white, those who survive long enough for an avalanche to slow have the air crushed from their lungs. Opening the mouth wide to get as much oxygen in as possible, snow will begin to funnel in. A person's best chances for survival is to wait. Haha. I put that in parentheses.
Yeah.
Wait until the snow slows, and then before it begins to harden into concrete-like consistency, use a hand to scoop the snow out and away from the nose and mouth. The second best thing to do is not panic. And again,
Sure.
haha.
Yeah.
By scooping snow away from your face, you create an air pocket that will become your lifeline, but it is also a death trap. The larger the pocket, the more oxygen you have available to breathe, therefore the longer you can survive. But because you are breathing out warm air, the snow that hovers within a degree of its melting point, that snow will begin to melt, which might not sound bad, but because of the compression and the temperature of the snow you're buried in, this melting snow will soon begin to freeze, creating a mask over the victims' faces.
Oh my gosh. Like there is no, I mean, it's designed to kill you.
There's no mercy.
There is no
There
mercy.
is no mercy. For rescuers, these are the hardest bodies to recover because it is a clear sign that they were alive and had a large enough air pocket to survive, but they were simply not found in time.
Oh my gosh.
And then there is the sheer weight of snow. Per square foot, snow can weigh up to 200 pounds, meaning that if someone is buried 6 feet beneath the surface, they already have thousands of pounds of weight on top of them.
How does your body survive that weight though? How is it not just crushing you?
It also, I think, is a good reminder that the human body is able to withstand insane things that we cannot comprehend.
Yeah. Whew.
Snow is also heartbreaking for victims who manage to stay conscious during rescue efforts. Because of the snow's insulation qualities, it allows sound to move down, but not up.
Of course.
So
Of course it does.
So those buried
Yeah.
can hear their rescuers.
Yeah.
But no matter how much you scream, they cannot hear you.
Yeah. I mean, Mother Nature was like, how do we make this impossible?
Devastation all
Yeah.
around. And I think it's air, open air sucks sound away. Whereas if you're encased in something, the sound stays with you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is there any positive, like, is there any good aspect to, not that there's a good aspect to being in an avalanche, but really so far there's, all of the things are working against you.
The positive to being buried.
I should have let you finish, sorry.
It's not really a positive. Is that the body will begin to shut down power sources to conserve energy, starting with your consciousness. After about 5 minutes, a person will fall asleep, and this can actually save their life. Being unconscious means that they won't panic, meaning they will use less air and allow that pocket to last longer. There are 3 main ways to locate victims buried in the snow, all of which will use the last known location to help narrow down the search field. If the location is unknown, they simply break into teams to search separate areas. And I'm not going to put this in any order of how important it is or what they do first. They're all kind of done at the same time.
Okay.
So first, dogs are brought in to the search area to search for smells of the victims buried in the snow. And we are going to go into this in much greater detail in the next episode. So I'm not going to dig in now about what dogs can do, but they are literally life-saving.
Subtext, Amanda, don't ask questions about the dogs.
We're going to move on from the dogs now. Second, there are beacons that you can use if a victim is wearing one. Anyone wearing a beacon can put theirs in a location setting, and it gives off a frequency for their location as well as a receiving setting. And this allows beacons with the location setting turned on to connect to beacons with the receiving
Okay.
Setting, and you're able to determine distance between you and where that location
Nice.
is.
It's like a two-way GPS kind of.
It's great. The third is using avalanche probes, and these probes are used to poke down several feet into the snow to feel for bodies. This is the most morbid way of finding people in the snow.
Yeah.
So normally between 10 and 12 feet long, probes are used in a repetitive manner to find people. There are two ways to probe: fine probing and coarse probing. Probing involves taking the probe pole and jamming it down into the snow with a great amount of force to even break the surface of the snow until you find something that feels different. So you're going fully on feel.
Imagine being, okay, so you've gone through the trauma of somehow surviving an avalanche. You're buried underneath God knows how many feet of snow. They find you, and then you get a
Stabbed.
pole to the face.
I contemplated that too.
Ugh.
That's how they find you. They did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had. Something that feels different under the snow is often felt as a soft resistance. So again, the snow is hard as concrete, and they run into something that feels squishy.
Yeah.
Like a body.
Yeah.
Others will then come over to check, and if they get the same result, only then do you begin digging. Once a victim is found, rescuers have to carefully dig a 45-degree angle to prevent any air pockets from collapsing, and the snow is so hard, they chip it away rather than dig it in shovelfuls. In order to extract a person, a hole at minimum the size of a refrigerator needs to be dug, and then this can take two men who know what they're doing and are practiced in this, can take 12 minutes to accomplish with shovels.
Oh, that's fast.
Very fast. The survival percentages for those buried alive look something like this. At 15 minutes, you have a 90% chance of surviving. At 35 minutes, you have 30% chance.
Oh, wow.
After 2 hours, you have a 3% chance, and that's only if a miraculous set of events took place, like the ones we will talk about later in this story. Because I don't want everyone to think that this is just death and destruction.
It sounds like we have both.
Visiting the area to enjoy spending time with friends and skiing were Kathy and Leroy, or Bud, Nelson, their kids 11-year-old Laura and 6-year-old Eric, Larry and Barbara Guinea and their boys arrived into Alpine Meadows on Friday, March 26th in 1982. Dave and Gian Han and their daughter Stephanie came into the area to ski, as skiing had always been a large part of their lives. They had another daughter, Linda, who stayed home to finish up some things, and once they arrived at Alpine Meadows, Dave called her to tell her not to bother coming. A storm had already begun to shut down the majority of the resort, making skiing locations difficult, if not impossible, to access. And so we're going to talk real quick about the layout, which is not vitally important, but I think it helps to get the picture in your head.
Yeah.
Alpine Meadows there's an Alpine Meadows Road that leads to the parking lot, and it is a massive parking lot. There's a maintenance shed to the right. Summit Terminal Building is kind of center, and then there's a lodge on the left, and then cabins are the road leads to the parking lot kind of goes in a loop and leads back to the road, and then along that road are cabins. The Summit Terminal building in the center acted as the employee headquarters and held a 22-ton counterweight made from concrete for the main chairlift. The lodge to the left sat closer to the base of the mountains than the other buildings, but it was the Summit Terminal building that was kind of the center hub of the resort. And it was built in an A-frame 3-story building that was about 100 feet long, and the counterweight secured cables that for the chairlift, and it ran like directly through the center of the building.
Okay.
The first floor was made up of restrooms, lockers, and offices for ski patrol. And then it had a really special modification with like halfway up the flight of stairs was a kennel for dogs. So it wasn't like an actual like room that you could go into, but you could put your dogs into this kennel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was for the search and rescue dogs. The second floor held the ski patrol room, radio office, the rooms for the lift operators, and employee locker rooms, and it had about 200 wooden lockers in the locker room. And then the third floor held offices and space for ticket checkers and trail crew. Within this building, a ton of gear was stored, including avalanche beacons, hundreds of probing poles, sleds to evacuate injured people, oxygen, anchors, carabiners, slings, ropes, and medical supplies. The other locations these items were stored at were 3 standby locations, all of which were at the top of the mountain. The maintenance shed, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of comical because it was not a shed, sat on the opposite side of the parking lot from the lodge on the right-hand side, and it was kind of built into the landscape there, so it had trees around it, and another different slope was like right there. And then towering above the resort, it was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. So the parking lot was the side that did not have mountains near it or on it. A mile and a half away from the resort, about halfway down Alpine Meadows Road, a small old cabin sat just off of the road and was being rented by ski lift operators Sandy Harris, Anna Conrad, and then their friend Beth Morrow often stayed with them when she was unable to make it to her home, either due to work or weather. Anna's boyfriend, Frank Yateman, was also a frequent visitor, and on occasion the girls would have additional tenants in their home. On March 28th, we know that a storm had rolled into the area, and after another 18 inches of snow fell, ski patrol began their day by throwing 500 pounds of hand charges and firing 26 rounds into the mountainside through the recoilless rifle. And that was already an increase from the day prior. So their normal, roughly 600 pounds,
Yeah.
they met in a day, almost in a day.
Can you imagine being, I don't know, the Nelsons in your cabin? And it's just like,
What's going on out there?
Yeah, a war zone in the mountain you're going to ski on?
Yeah. To follow in the afternoon, they shot an additional 14 rounds from the recoilless rifle after finding 13 more inches of snow had fallen during the day.
At what point do they just call it? At what point are they like, hey, guys, listen, we've set off 500 pounds of explosives. We're not skiing today.
So actually, that was a huge fight that they had, and I didn't go into it too much here, but there was a huge fight between like the owner and the manager and the ski patrol for we need to have this open. And in circumstances like this, it wasn't. They do the right thing and shut it down the day that this occurred.
What's a ski resort liability insurance like?
I would love to see it. Okay, so March 29th, the winds and snow were so strong that the ski lifts were inoperable in the upper sections of the slope, and Alpine Meadows was forced to close them down. Not many were heading out to ski anyways. Ironically, those who were the very advanced skiers that wanted to go to those upper slopes. So they closed down those upper slopes because the ski lifts they couldn't operate them. The wind was too bad. They were just blowing all over the place. And the people that wanted to go up there and had the experience and the knowledge and the crazy enough to do it were like, nope, sorry, you can't take this bunny hill.
Yeah. Okay.
On March 30th at around 4:30 p.m., the patrolmen were taking their second stab at bombing the slopes to perform avalanche control. And this was for the day. So they had gone out in the morning, went out again at 4:30 p.m., and this was the first day that the patrolmen were seeing any avalanche activity at all from this storm. Up until this point, the slopes had stayed very steady in holding the snow that was accumulating. Though the weather was horrid, all of the patrolmen were feeling excited as all of them had been setting off avalanches all day, which is what they live for.
Oh, they're excited. Okay. Yeah. That tracks.
Woo!
We get to set off bombs.
Yeah. Casey and Lanny then were throwing bombs from the ski lift as they rode it up to the top of the mountain by taping 4 charges together.
It sounds like the Wild West. What are they doing?
It is. It is the
I mean, it's literally
iced
the West.
version.
Yeah, it is the Wild West, but wow.
So Laney and Tom later decided to target Beaver Bowl and try to protect the new lodge, and noted that the air was holding a ton of static and was in fact snapping and causing an arc when they held their poles out. With an extreme worry of the explosives on their back.
Oh my God, I forgot about the backpack bombs.
The men trudged forward through snow as deep as their armpits to throw explosives. Despite not being able to hear or see avalanches occur, Tom reported that he was sure he saw some fracture lines and large debris on the slopes. Laney and Tom, turning to figure out the best way down, both had a chill come over them, and Laney said, "The forces here are so different, I feel like we're standing on top of a monster."
Oh no.
So now we're rolling into the next day, March 31st, 1982, and if you'll remember, this is the day. So day of, the storm that had been hitting the Lake Tahoe area for the previous 4 days had finally forced Alpine Meadows to close completely for the day. The storm had already packed 7.5 feet of snow on top of the season's existing snowfall, which was reported as 89 inches or 7.5 feet.
Holy cow.
With the mass amount of snow and wind, the wind gusts were causing cross-loading on the slopes, which again is essentially when the wind blows and the snow is collected in a gully or a low section of the mountain, and it just creates a really unstable layer in that spot.
Yeah.
In addition to this, the temperatures were fluctuating quite a bit, which was another reason to believe the snow was unstable. Around 5 a.m., Larry and Tom arrived at Alpine Meadows after Larry drove them in. His door cracked open so he could poke his head out the open door and see if anyone else was on the road, and also to see where the side of the road was. Oh. On their way in, they rolled along at about 6 miles per hour. Miraculously, they arrived into the parking lot, which had been filled with piles of snow taking up nearly all of the free parking spaces, yet Larry found a spot right next to the ski lodge. Stepping out of his Jeep, Larry's head snapped up as he saw something small bounding through the parking lot. The strong winds of the blizzard had picked up a small 8 to 10 inch saw-wet owl and was tossing it around.
Oh.
Running over to try to help it, the wind blew it under a parked bus, and being unable to see it, Larry left to get to work. These owls are small, with light brown and ivory coloring and yellow eyes. According to Apache legend, seeing this particular bird is an omen of disaster and death.
What?
Jim, arriving not long after, had his 1-year-old German Shepherd with him, whose name is Mariah, and he was training Mariah to be a search and rescue dog. He took her to the kennel in the Summit Terminal building before starting his day. The patrol crew dispersed and started tackling avalanche control and clearing snow where they could. Casey and Dennis were plowing snow near a lift when they noticed a pile of avalanche runout debris. And they thought it was odd since the area didn't typically have avalanche runout as far down the slope as they were. While this was happening, 13 more inches of snow fell, bringing the storm total to 100 inches, and it was still raging. Sitting uneasy in the tiny cabin, Anna and Frank decided to go outside, but since Anna didn't have her powder pants with her, she and Frank decided to make their way to Alpine Meadows so that she could get them out of her employee locker at the Summit Terminal building. After calling to verify there were no avalanche control occurring, they decided they could go down the road. At one point, Anna fell into snow that was about 6 foot deep, and even with Frank's help, it took her an hour to climb out of the hole.
So they're walking?
They're skiing. By this time, it was 2:30 p.m., and they were back on the road heading to the resort. Everyone gathered in crews. Jim, Tom, Larry, Igor, and Casey all left just after 3 p.m. for Squaw Valley, as they had a chairlift that they could use to bomb parts of Alpine Meadows Mountains from the chairlift. So they were going to ride up Squaw Valleys and throw onto Alpine Meadows' side.
Okay.
On their way, they passed Anna and Frank and chastised them for being out in the weather before both parties continued on their way. At this time, back in the cabin, Bud, Dave, and Laura, who much like Anna and Frank were having a hard time being cooped up, and decided to hike their way to the lodge, which was roughly a half-mile away, to see if anything was going on there. And then also they were going to try to stock up on some food.
Okay.
On their way, they ran into 2 different people who suggested they turn back and told them that the lodge was closed and it was too dangerous to be out. Even with the warning, they trudged forward. Inside the terminal building, Bernie, Beth, Jeff, Tad, and Randy were all in the patrol room going over the plan for the road clearing and closure, as the patrolmen would be working higher on the mountains. Around 3:30, the group who had headed over to Squaw Valley called in that they made it to the chairlift and would be making their way up soon. Bernie, seeing that Anna had arrived at the Summit Terminal building and had risked her life, put the phone down and then laid into her. He was 5'6" and known to spit long-winded safety lectures, not just to employees, but also to visitors. He did this because he knew of the dangers and cared about their lives, even though his response was often in anger.
Yeah.
After making his points on the map of every area she put herself in danger, he let her go to do her thing and made his way back to the patrol room. It was then, at 3:45 p.m., that Jake radioed in. He had taken a snowmobile into the mountains to do some patrol work before helping with the roads. Avalanche was the only clear word that came through. It would be later discovered that Jake sealed his fate by the placement of his radio, that he would have to remove his hand from the throttle, slowing himself down as he called in the warning of an avalanche before being swallowed.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Back in the patrol room, it took seconds for the word to register in the minds of the people standing there. Bernie and Jeff stepped towards the radio, straining to hear more through the static. It was then the lights flickered, blew out, and with their next breath, the building was blown to bits.
What?
And that is where
Kayla.
we're ending
Stop.
this one. I'm sorry.
Blown to bits? Okay,
Yes.
this is so unfair.
It is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
There are survivors. I will say that. There's more than one survivor.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where we're going to leave for the first
Okay.
part.